Welcome, everyone. We are live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. And the topic for today is the influence of current geopolitics on energy. And with us, a friend and a famous person, Temi Nimet, Dr. Temi Nimet. Sorry. She's an energy analyst and she's based in Oxford, UK. She has a report website, the Nimet report website. That's the website is thenimetreport.com. She is ESG consulting and she works extensively on the energy realities. And only for records, only this is me. Let me remove this.
The amazing Armando.
So great to see you, Dr. Temi, again.
Great to
A-
see you.
It's a pleasure. It's a great pleasure. Let me start, please, Dr. Temi. Nowadays, we have several conflicts in the world. Gaza, Venezuela, almost Venezuela is going. Ukraine, that doesn't stop every time. How do you see these conflicts and the influence on the energy sector, energy flows?
That's a really great question. I think the war in Ukraine has really fundamentally rewired how global energy flows throughout the world. And it's forced a sort of rerouting of these energy flows. So, where Russia used to provide a lot of cheap natural gas to German industry and various other countries in the European Union, and as well as Russian oil went to various countries as well. But now with the war and the European Union and all of their sanctions and everything, it's forced all of that away. Of course, as I'm sure your audience is well aware, shifted it away from Europe towards Asia. And instead, what's been replacing, especially natural gas in the European Union, has been American LNG, as well as LNG from Qatar and maybe some of the other Middle Eastern countries. And of course, there's increased natural gas from Norway. So it's not just a European issue anymore with the war and sort of the sanctions movement and everything. It's just rerouted the whole network in that sort of geographic region. And I think one of the interesting elements of the Ukraine conflict has been its sort of knock-on effects in other places. And you talk about Gaza a little bit. And the war in Gaza threatened choke points. So we had all of these different issues a few months ago or even a year ago where the Houthis were putting ships in there, little boats to stop the tankers from going through the Straits of Hormuz, affected the Suez Canal to some extent. And we saw oil prices spike when those shipments couldn't take place anymore. So it's interesting how this geopolitical shift has also bolstered the role of the Gulf states in trying to negotiate some kind of settlement between Gaza and Israel after that horrendous attack on Israel on October 7th, all those years ago. And then you mentioned Venezuela. And I
Mhm.
think Venezuela is a very fascinating development, and that's definitely in your region there. Um, and I think what's interesting is their dispute with Guyana, because
Yeah,
Guyana has this massive new oil production
yeah.
offshore. And I just wanted to put some stats out there. So we've got Exxon, Chevron, and the Chinese National Oil Company as partners on these fields. We've got 674,000 barrels per day are being produced right now.
Big
They
production.
have they have installed capacity of around 900,000 barrels a day. Exxon's planning to increase that to 1.3 million barrels per day
Wow.
by 2027 and 1.7 million barrels a day by 2030. So what is that going to do to Venezuela? right?
Good
And
question.
Venezuela's saying, well, actually those fields are in our territory and whatnot. But the fact that China's involved in this project, I don't know, that throws an interesting monkey wrench into the situation.
You know that Brazil has very close to this Guyana, a reserve that's not explored yet. It's a big reserve, supposedly. And we are watching this situation because can affect our process there. We are trying to have license to start working in this area called equatorial margin.
Yeah.
Is much more than pre-salt reserves. Only for your understanding, it's a very big one. But you mentioned Russia, and the U.S. is forcing Russia to stop exporting oil, specifically oil. Gas is a problem, but oil, for instance, Brazil imports diesel from Russia, and
Yeah.
is facing a threat of more tariffs based on this. How do you see this situation of tariffs? And
It's interesting because there's many people out there who say tariffs don't work and or sanctions don't work, right? The sanctions have unintended consequences, and that could very well be the case for this. It's unclear. I think they're just trying to use that as temporary leverage to force these countries to get angry with Russia and say, "Can just you end the war already? Just end it," and to come up with a settlement and to try and expedite that. So, on the one hand, it's a typical strategy to use when maybe other levers have been attempted and haven't been so successful, and so now trying to use this for Brazil, especially as being part of BRICS, and having a fairly close relationship with Russia, to try and use that to persuade Russia to come to some kind of a deal.
that's right, that's right. And talking about natural gas, moving from energy to natural gas, Russia stopped exporting to Europe almost. It's not the volume that they expected to do is not Nord Stream in the past, and so and it was replaced by LNG from the United States, by
Yeah.
cargo ships, and so. But this is not a very good equation. It's not stable, I suppose. What's your opinion? And renewables can compensate these problems, or renewables are inefficient enough?
Armando, you always have great questions, and that's another one. It's very fascinating to see how Europe has tried to sort of decouple itself from Russian pipeline gas and doing these sort of new dependencies. Because if you're not producing something yourself, you're dependent on whoever's providing it for you, and that's the same with anything, whether it's energy or critical minerals, which I'm sure um, enters into the equation as well. But so instead of being dependent on Russia, now Europe is dependent on the United States and any other country that is exporting LNG, so that they can continue to have a reasonably priced energy for their industrial build out, because now that the EU has decided it actually needs to invest in its military,
Yeah,
they want to, reshape all of their manufacturing in order to produce military equipment. But military equipment is very steel heavy, very aluminum heavy. And so therefore
hmm,
it requires a lot of energy to make this stuff.
yeah, yeah,
And before they could rely on cheap energy from Russia, but now they're relying on cheap energy from elsewhere. And as you point out, with respect to the renewables, there's trade-offs in any type of energy. And I think trade-offs is one of the biggest themes in
yeah,
energy and geopolitics, and unintended consequences. So renewables have, I would say, wind and solar have partially compensated the removal of natural gas from Russia. Um, but there's been, since 2021, really long periods of global stilling or calming, or Dunkelflaute, which is when you get these long periods of calm. Well, if you have factories that need to operate in order to produce weapons what a manufacturing for your society, and you're reliant on wind power, but the wind isn't blowing, and so then what do you do? And with the natural gas being out of the picture from Russia and the reliance on this other imported dependency, it really highlights the sort of intermittency and how that can affect how things get built, right? Because how can you build stuff if you don't have the energy? And what's interesting, with respect to Germany, for example, they had some of the most efficient, safe nuclear power plants in the world, and they shut them all down.
Sound down.
And so then it's like, okay, well, if emissions are your concern and you're worried about where you're going to get your natural gas from because they banned fracking, they banned to some extent
Yeah,
the offshore natural gas development by Holland, although they've opened it up again, which I find interesting. So Germany and Holland are partnering to reopen or explore or develop a little more off the coast there where they had closed it because of earthquakes previously.
very
So
interesting. Very
very
interesting.
interesting. And it's like, okay, the EU wants to pivot and say, well, we're going to phase out natural gas, but at the same time, they want to increase all of this manufacturing and industrial production, which requires lots of reliable energy, and the wind and solar aren't doing it. Plus, they want people to stop driving cars and have like internal combustion engine and have EVs. So all this new demand for electricity and which requires energy to produce electricity. I mean, it's just I don't know. It's very frustrating to see what's going on in Europe because they're in a pickle.
Yeah,
If they don't have this reliable, cheap energy, where else are they going to get it from? And now France is trying to increase its nuclear power. Germany's got more coal being, using more coal power.
because
So yeah,
tell me, they are forcing to do not allow nuclear, natural gas, forcing renewables. And everyone knows that renewables cannot sustain the system by themselves. They need other energy to compensate and to make the intermittent compensation. And petrochemicals is another problem because
yeah.
how can you survive without petrochemicals? So who is forcing? What's the logic behind this situation?
Well, I mean, it's all part of the Paris Agreement and the commitment to net zero by 2050. So,
Uh,
the net zero emissions where it's going to be balanced off so that whatever emissions you're left with by 2050, you're somehow canceling it out either through nature related projects like preserving forests, which are carbon sinks, or doing some other kind of offset where you're planting trees or some kind of what I think Mark Carney has talked often about having a large global carbon market where you can invest in preserving forests in Africa or something. And the Democratic Republic of Congo signed a big agreement back in January where they were going to preserve this massive forest, um, this forest corridor in Africa and get compensated to do so. And it would be from European countries or developed countries who would help preserve those forests in order to compensate for their emissions, right?
yeah,
But this comes with problems because then it's like, are you saying that Africa shouldn't build anything, shouldn't
yeah,
have reliable energy
yeah,
because that sort of thing. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting development, and the big COP, the Conference of the Parties, the big climate meetings are happening in Brazil,
Yeah, yeah, next month, yeah.
as you know, next month.
Will be a frustration because people are not coming. Well, it's expensive and every type of problem they have. Yeah,
Yeah, plus, where they cut down the forest to build a road and
yeah. Everyone knows, oh, it's a shame. It's a shame.
yeah, that was a
Uh,
shame.
yeah, you mentioned BRICS in the beginning of our conversation, and nowadays we have SCO,
Right.
China, India, Russia, and other countries. Are they reshaping energy flows? And the point is, are they planning a power Siberia gas pipeline, a big pipeline? Is it the new Nord Stream 2?
Yes, it is. It's the power of Siberia too. So, just to step back a little bit, we've got the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which originally came out of the end of the Cold War, and it was how to sort of rationalize the different defense arrangements, potential for terrorism in former Soviet countries that border around China. So there's 10 main countries that are members, and it's mostly in Eurasia, right? So we've got China, India, Russia, Pakistan, Iran, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Belarus. So you have a bunch of former Soviet countries, and then a couple of extra ones that are nearby, like um, Iran and India.
Hmm.
And so they came together, and they have actually a formal secretariat. It's some have likened it or compared it to NATO, so it's like a Eurasian version of NATO. I'm not so sure about that, but basically they they want to have a rationalization of how they deal with one another to avoid conflict, right? And it's quite interesting because, of course, there's competing interests in two countries like India and Pakistan
All the time.
all the time, right? And, that kind of thing. And plus Iran in there, which is interesting. But they basically said that they wanted to have a development strategy where they wanted to have better infrastructure across the different nations. And so, like with BRICS has a development bank,
Yeah.
now they announced at this past meeting last week that that China was going to put seed money in to a development bank for the SCO. So they're putting in 2 billion won, and whatever that converts into US dollars, I think it's like 250 million or something like that, which will then be loaned out to, just like with the BRICS Development Bank, for various Belt and Road Initiative projects.
Uh,
Great for China.
yeah. Do you see that SCO is a BRICS competitor? And another point, India is participating in every group. So something surprise.
Well, I'm kind of not surprised that India would do that. I think they're covering their bases, because they're growing to be one of the biggest economies in the world. The World Bank projects that the GDP increase in India and Southeast Asia will be averaging between 5 and 8% between
Oh,
now and 2035. That's massive. Every year, that kind of GDP growth. So, they're trying to position themselves, um, feet in one side, feet in the other side. So they want to have good relations with North America. They want to have good relations with China. They want to have the good relations with South America and Africa, which is BRICS. So I get why they're doing it, just to cover their bases, so they'll be able to trade and have good relations with all of these different
yeah,
countries in the world. Um, but I think BRICS and the SEO are a little bit different, but perhaps at one point they'll merge together, which I could totally see happening, because why would you have two separate development banks unless the China's thinking of it in terms of World Bank and IMF. I mean,
yeah,
why is there two different global banks? Maybe they're looking at it as, oh, and there's also the Inter-American Bank. So maybe China's like, well, one will be like the World Bank and the other will be like the IMF. I don't know. I'm not sure what their rationale is for the two different banks.
yeah,
Um, but what's interesting is how these two different organizations shape the investments that happen within those jurisdictions. And at the SEO summit, there was a really big focus on energy cooperation, especially with the power of Siberia too,
yeah,
which would, in essence, divert all of the natural gas that would have been flowing into Europe from Russia. All of that now will be flowing to China.
yeah.
And even though they've been talking about this project, I think for like 10 years, the sticking point was the price. So what price
Will be.
did Russia want China to pay? And I think at this point, China got a good deal.
That's right. But SCO is more military focus, I suppose, and BRICS at the
Yeah,
beginning, because BRICS,
initially.
yeah, initially,
Yeah.
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 I
Whereas
go-
BRICS is more like a forum where the
yeah,
different countries can get together, have alignment in how they're going to trade, how they're going to work together, attracting capital maybe to their jurisdictions. Where the SCO, I think, is a little bit different. And I think part of it is because they're more connected geographically
yeah,
than the
that's right.
BRICS
That's
countries.
right. That's right. BRICS they has countries very separated geographically speaking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Talking about renewable energies and the minerals needed for renewable energy that these minerals come from China, Congo, some are from Latin America, Chile and Brazil a little bit.
Yeah.
How do you see the US and the EU considering vulnerabilities in this situation? How can they secure this situation of minerals?
That's another fantastic question because I feel like there's a lot of talk. They have the Minerals Security Partnership. Then Canada announced some partnership with the EU about a month or so ago, where they're going to be trying to develop critical minerals in Canada. Canada actually has quite a lot,
Oh, yeah.
um, but in North America, there's a fair amount. Europe actually has a fair amount. The issue is getting the permitting, and there's so many regulatory barriers. There's a lot of environmental regulations, a lot of it necessary, some of it unnecessary, that holds back development. And then the other issue is that even if, like, let's say that companies are persuaded to develop critical minerals in, say, North America, maybe Canada, maybe Europe, Australia, or whatever. Let's say they build it up, invest all that money. What they found is that because China controls so much of the processing and has a lot of leverage in other countries that produce stuff, that they can flood the market really quickly.
Hmm.
And then all that investment goes down the drain because they can't compete with the flooding of the market. And that's actually what happened with I forget which mine it was, maybe a copper mine. I can't remember. Maybe no, it was cobalt in the United States about a year ago, where they had done all this investment, got up and running, and China immediately flooded the market so that they actually went out of business. So President Trump's position is that the United States will provide in some circumstances, and they made an agreement in California with the Department of Defense, I think, taking a 10% share in a mine and offering a floor price
Oh,
so that even if China floods the market, it won't shut the mine down. So I don't know, maybe that's something that the European Union or Canada might have to look at in order to ensure that there's alternatives out there for critical minerals.
perfect, perfect. Yes, a contingency for a very big pressure from the United States. That's right.
Yeah.
When we talk about selling oil and gas to Asia, and I know that Russia is doing that, Iran is doing, Venezuela is confusing, but is doing, we don't know exactly. They are doing this process using different coins, different currency than
Yeah.
dollar, ruble, yuan. How do you see this change from dollar to other currencies in terms of energy changing, energy challenging?
Well, during the previous 4 years under the Biden administration, there was a real concerted effort, especially through the BRICS organization, to find a different way of, doing for currency exchanges, especially with, energy trade. And since the election of Donald Trump, all that discussion has kind of gone quiet, which I find really interesting. Because, like, even with this new development bank that the SCO is trying to establish, what happens is which settlement, um, organization do you use? Do you use the SWIFT? And the problem with the SWIFT is that there's sanctions involved, that you can't uh, trade with Russia using the SWIFT system. Do you use the cross-border interbank system, or CRIPS, which is something that China and Russia use? There's also a Russia-specific one. And do you undermine the petrodollar? Because right now, the dollar's used in these exchanges, you use the SWIFT system and so on. Um, so I don't know. It depends on how they wish to proceed with all of this. I think if there's some kind of peace agreement with Russia before the end of the year, then that might quiet down a little more
More
the attempts to erode the petrodollar. But it's hard to say. It's so
hard to say.
unpredictable on what they're doing. But that takes time, because nobody wants to use the yuan, to be honest.
Yeah,
Because then you're switching the US dollar, which has been relatively reliable, except for maybe the past 4 years, as a means of currency trade. But do you really want to have China holding that power? I don't know. Some people would say, "Oh, well, yeah, China will be more neutral, and they do a lot of the
yeah.
trade." I'm like, "Well, maybe,
But
maybe
but
not."
but tell me, with the increasing production, the U.S. production internally, they are producing more than 70% of their demand today. Petrodollar is less important. It's not petrodollar, it's dollar, because they are not importing too much oil, only 7 million
Yeah.
barrels a day. So the influence of petrodollar is China will import much more than the United States very soon.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the deal that was made in the 70s, when the petrodollar was first established, was that any trade from the Middle East in oil in the world would happen with American dollars.
Mhm.
And I think the issue becomes, if the and part of that was because the US was importing so much. But now that
Exactly,
they're not importing,
exactly.
um, why should China have to use American
True,
dollars,
true,
right?
exactly. That's the point.
Um, yeah, so I understand that position, but I mean, the
The power,
hegemony of the dollar is still
yeah,
there, right? Over
and
80% of trade remains
yeah,
US dominated. So, and part of that is due to liquidity, and a part of it is inertia. I mean, you get used to that, using that, and people don't like change.
yeah. That's
They
right.
don't
That's
like
right.
change.
Do you see North-South tensions? Because we have tensions with Middle East and Asia, but North-South. I mean, Brazil is not very well with the United States. Venezuela, Colombia, and other countries. How do you see, and you see that can affect investments, this kind of relationship, bad relationship?
Yeah, I mean, the global south, we've got the different changes happening, right? So we have Malay in Argentina, which was like an earthquake, and it was amazing to see how well that country is doing under the changes that he's brought in. Then we have El Salvador and the changes wrought there, that has made it like an incredibly safe country, which then has um, kind of brought in investment flows and so on. But Brazil is. I feel like there's a restructuring happening in the global south, and
Mhm.
it's we're at one of those inflection points where things could go in different directions, and I think it's a bit early to tell just where that's going to go.
Yeah,
Um, but I think with the geopolitical divides, there's uneven progress in the different countries, and I don't know. I think there's a lot of
yeah,
volatility there that needs strong
it's
leadership
strong.
from
Yeah,
the Western world in order to sort of overcome
yeah.
those risks.
to recover the old position. I don't know exactly. I know that you are Canadian. How do you see Canadian and Americans? Are they friends again or not yet?
Well, you know,
Sorry
that's
by this tricky
no, no,
question.
no. I mean, it depends on where you are, right? So if you're in Western Canada, for the most part, they were like, "What are you going on about this elbows up stuff?" But if you're from Eastern Canada, that's all they were talking about because of the manufacturing and the idea that Trump was being insulting by saying first 51st state and all that kind of stuff. But, Canada and the United States have been neighbors for a long time, and during the '70s and '80s, there was, a conversation about what does it mean to be a good neighbor, and I think with respect to Canada, we haven't been such a good neighbor. There's certain realities there that Canadians don't wanna admit, that we have been taking advantage of the United States with respect especially with respect to defense. And instead of, having a strong defense and looking after the Arctic, we've been talking about Canada needs to patrol the Arctic better because Russia's in there, China's now making inroads in the Arctic, and we talk, 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 and don't do anything. Um, and then Canada was like, "Well, America, you say you're gonna build some icebreakers. Can we get in on that with you and share the cost?" And everything that we wanna do, we want someone else to pay for. So at some point, I think America said, "You guys need to start pulling your weight." And Canada was like, "What do you mean?" And at least the officials, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think a lot of Canadians don't realize just how much we're dependent on the United States with
yeah,
respect to defense
exactly.
and and of course with trade because it's just easier. It's easier to trade with the US. The distances are close, we
Yeah, sure.
understand the people, language is the same, culture is
Neighbors.
pretty much the same.
Yeah,
And now there's talk that Canada should diversify and trade with the EU. And it's like, well, what? I mean, now you're gonna shift over there, there's
yeah,
all that regulatory burden with the
yeah.
EU.
I suppose it's a
Yeah.
very short time because this will become better very soon, as my opinion.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, there's a lot of talk and, they're signing all these agreements with the EU about
Um,
aligning regulations. I'm just like, "Are you kidding? You'll just make Canadian companies uncompetitive in the markets that matter." Even if we don't want to trade with the United States and we want to be less dependent because right now I think it's over 78% of Canadian trade goes to the United States or
yeah,
72, something like that. The better market to be aiming for is Asia. They're growing.
growing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's a surprise or not. Please tell us. You are preparing a history channel about every some countries. I don't know exactly. Can you tell us, or is it still a surprise?
Well, it's still a surprise, but I'll just give a sneak peek. I'm putting together a series of 15 short 3-minute videos on Canadian energy history. And
Uh-huh.
it goes from the 1950s up to, I think, around 1988 with the free trade agreement. So it's like this little, from like 1945 to 1988, just
Very interesting.
15 little stories about
Fantastic.
energy.
Fantastic. This is Dr. Temi Nimet. Uh, the nimetreport.com was a great pleasure to see you and to listen your thoughts. It's every time great.
And Armando, you always have the best questions. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you again.
Thank you. Great day for you.